One of the most significant police brutality trials in U.S. history gets underway today in Minneapolis. Former police officer Derek Chauvin is charged with murdering a black man, George Floyd, after kneeling on his neck for almost 9 minutes' time.
At a vigil for George Floyd at the Greater Friendship Missionary Church in Minneapolis, his brother makes a prayer.
So I'm asking my father upstairs, I'm asking him, we need justice. We need it now.
The trial of Derek Chauvin, the former police officer facing murder and manslaughter charges for George Floyd's death, begins here on Monday at the Hennepin County Government Center. The most serious charge, second-degree murder, could carry a prison sentence of 40 years. The defense will suggest that Floyd died from health issues and drug use and will argue that Chauvin's restraint of Floyd by kneeling on his neck for almost 9 minutes was a justified use of force. The prosecution will say that Chauvin killed Floyd by doing so and argue that no such force was necessary, pointing to the fact that Floyd told police he was dying nearly 10 times.
The only thing that killed George Perry Floyd Jr. on May 25th, 2020, here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, was an overdose of excessive force.
Earlier this month, the city of Minneapolis agreed to pay $27 million to settle a civil lawsuit with George Floyd's family. 2 jurors were dropped from Derek Chauvin's trial over fears they'd been affected by this announcement. 3 other former police officers charged with aiding and abetting will appear in court in August. Floyd's death triggered a cultural reckoning. There were protests nationwide against racism and police brutality, occasionally turning violent. It reinvigorated the Black Lives Matter movement, which spread around the world.
To get a bit more analysis on the George Floyd trial today, let's bring in Tristan Cabello, a historian of African cultures and politics at Johns Hopkins University. Tristan, thanks so much for speaking to us. Explain this to our international viewers, if you will, first. Why is this trial such a symbolic one in the States?
Well, this is a historical moment right now in the States. I mean, first, George Floyd is really a symbolic figure. As you just said, he became a rallying cry all over the world to fight against police brutality. Second, this is the first police brutality trial of the Biden era. And as you know, Biden really puts social justice and racial justice at the center of its platform. And third, to me, this is the first post-January 6th police brutality trial. What did we see on January 6th? We saw several people storming the Capitol, predominantly white, who did so without being arrested, without being supervised by the police at all. And there was a stark contrast between what happened to George Floyd, for example, who didn't do actually anything and died, and what happened at the Capitol, where people actually stormed the Capitol and did not go to prison. So there was really here a stark divide between those two Americas, one that is pretty much free to do whatever they want, and another one that gets killed by the police.
Now, of course, there is a jury in this trial. It took 2 weeks of jury selection to actually get the people who will be there today. One of the most difficult things in that choice was impartiality, not just because this trial is so racially charged, but also given that so many people saw that incredibly tragic and powerful video of the end of George Floyd's life. Do you think that this jury can be an impartial one, given the current state of feeling in the United States?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's totally impossible to have an impartial jury at this point. And as you know, every juror had to go through a 16-page questionnaire that went really deep into their private and political aspirations. But the point here is not really to have an impartial jury. The point is to have a jury that can leave their biases and their filters at the door when they come into court to give their opinion about the trial. And to that end, I think that both sides have done a very good job at selecting jurors that could potentially give an impartial decision in this case.
Derek Chauvin's lawyers are surely going to argue that he was just following police procedure. They'll say that Floyd's death was due to perhaps drugs in his system or underlying health conditions. Do you think that there is any truth to that argument?
No, we already know what the arguments are going to be. And of course, on the lawyer's side, it's going to be that Derek Chauvin was just doing his job. And indeed, he was at some point. And on the other hand, of course, George Floyd's, the lawyers, the police officers' lawyers are going to argue that George Floyd had drug in the system. So we already know what the arguments are going to be. The fact is, the jury knows so much more about what happened that day because they saw the video, they saw the commentators on TV and online. The trial is going to be live streamed, so there is going to be a lot of pressure on those jurors to make the right decision.
Indeed, but police officers have notoriously been found not criminally liable in these types of cases. Is there any way that this one will be different?
So I cannot really predict what's going to happen, but you're absolutely right that in the case of Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner, Mike Brown in Ferguson, all of the police officers have been found not guilty in those cases, and this has generated riots all over the United States. In that case, I don't see that there is anything really different that may happen, and this is also the reason why we may see a lot of rioting and protesters in the streets in the next couple of weeks.
And for the Black Lives Matter protesters already, as for many people, this trial seems to be a sign of greater systemic racism across America, and particularly in the police force. Is anything being done to correct that, either on a local or national level in the U.S., to avoid this kind of thing happening in the future?
Absolutely. So as you know, Biden put also the issue of police brutality at the center of his platform, but Biden cannot really do anything in terms of regulating police departments in the United States because the police departments in the United States are completely decentralized. What we have seen, though, at the local level in DC, in Chicago, in Seattle, in San Francisco to some point, is a movement to defund the police and to make sure also that disciplinary records of police officers are made available to the public. So when there is a case like this one, we can have access to the disciplinary record of a police officer.
Tristan, thank you for speaking to us there from Washington, D.C., Tristan Cabello. All right, next and now for you, let's head over to France, where the number of people being treated for COVID-19 in hospital intensive care units has